John Brown's body lies mourning in his grave. Oh, John Brown's body lies mourning in his grave. John Brown's body lies mourning in his grave. His soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah.
Hello, welcome to the Redneck Revolt, the official podcast of John Brown Gun Club and the greater Redneck Revolt Network. I'm Ryan.
I'm Jamil.
We're glad you could tune in. Redneck Revolt is a national network of community defense projects from a broad spread of political, religious, and cultural backgrounds. It is a pro-worker, anti-racist organization that focuses on working-class liberation from the oppressive systems which dominate our lives. On July 7th, Redneck Revolt celebrates its one-year anniversary as a national network. In celebration of this anniversary, we are launching our podcast. The idea behind the podcast is to be able to bring you the news of the Redneck Revolt Network, taking a peek inside individual local branches throughout the country to get a sense of what's going on in their communities, interviews with folks outside the network who are doing the work, and a host of other subjects and topics as it relates to our greater mission and principles.
Be sure to check us out at redneckrevolt.org and on Facebook and Twitter too. If you want to get involved with Redneck Revolt, the first step is to find out if a local branch exists in your town. If so, you can hit them up directly, but if not, contact Redneck Revolt via email or social, and we can begin the process of forming a branch in your community. On episode 1 of the Redneck Revolt, we dive into an interview with the founders, Tyler, Connor, and Dave, about the origins of the project and how it came together, as well as discussion about all of the work we've done over the past year with Cam and Sophia. And then I discuss a look forward at what is upcoming for Redneck Revolt and the John Brown Gun Clubs.
Hi y'all, this is Sophia here, and today I am on the phone with Dave, Tyler, and Connor. A lot of people don't know this, but there was an incarnation of Redneck Revolt during the 2000s. Tyler, Dave, and Connor were all a part of that. This segment we're going to get into a little bit of the history of Redneck Revolt, and I'm going to start off with you, Dave. What was the inspiration for Redneck Revolt, and what was it like founding it, and get a little bit into the early years?
What we know, and what most people know as Redneck Revolt now, started as the John Brown Gun Club in Lawrence, Kansas, around 2004. We started as a community defense organization that was focused on firearms access and education. At that point, within mostly already existing radical or left-wing anarchist organizing that was happening in Lawrence, Kansas. The John Brown Gun Club, at that point, came out of a situation where our organization that was existing at that point, Kansas Mutual Aid, was being targeted by the Federal Bureau of Investigation in what was basically a set-up operation to try to take down our organization, as well as many people who were planning on traveling to the political conventions that were happening in Boston and New York that year. And our organization had been targeted by the FBI and harassed to be prevented from attending those protests. In direct response to the FBI repression, which included home visits, workplace visits, visits to family members and to close friends, a couple of us that were involved with that local organization decided to invest in our first tactical firearms to kind of just show that we weren't going to be scared by the FBI. So the John Brown Gun Club was formed in 2004 as a result, and from that point existed to kind of train local folks in firearms safety and use, as well as to build a culture within social movements, working around communities and community self-defense in firearms use and access, because that was really kind of unheard of at that point, and staunchly opposed by many people within the political left, the more institutional left. I mean, we also opposed those same people, but the culture that had been created within those communities had been one of disarmament, not allowing members to use firearms, trying to keep people actively restricted away from using their Second Amendment rights, their rights to organize within their communities around self-defense and community defense. and we wanted to kind of change that conversation and that culture.
Do you think any of those tendencies of disarmament affected the more radical people you organized with, or what kind of barriers did that present to you at that time?
I mean, we had a lot of backlash and reaction for being armed. I think also one of the major differences was that we were very openly armed with the work that we did. We weren't trying to be some clandestine organization that was hiding the fact that we were training with firearms or using firearms in legal ways. You know, we didn't want to shock people or make it a surprise, so the next time the FBI came knocking, they couldn't just use that against us in some way that shocked the community. We didn't want it to be a surprise to anyone. We wanted to be transparent and open, and we also wanted to demystify guns and the culture around them. But there was a lot of backlash. People were nervous or scared. I think we still see that now in a lot of the organizing we're doing, although it's been very different with this attempt. I think that there's now a more popular understanding and acceptance of the role of firearms and armed self-defense within the work that we do. But we also had to do a lot of work then, and I think we're still doing a lot of work now, to differentiate ourselves from armed communist cadres, which I think is like, people think of the Weather Underground or these armed guerrilla groups, and they think about armed work. And that's not what we're proposing. We're talking about community defense and community self-defense. We're not talking about guerrilla warfare. We're not talking about clandestine, underground, armed actions against the state. I'm not here necessarily to attack people who do engage in those efforts. I'm here to just distance myself and the work that I do from them. That's not our tactic or strategy. It's just not what we do. We are armed community members who are trying to defend our communities and build the culture within those communities to be able to defend themselves. We want to replicate that culture. We don't want to dominate or become the face of that culture. We want to replicate it and allow it to be self-replicating within our communities. And so I think that the more honest and open we are about that, and the more clear we are about that, we get less backlash. I think that people still have a lot of preconceived notions, especially amongst the left, of what armed work looks like. They only associate it with vanguardist groups, even though we're very different from that.
In the original incarnation of John Brown Gun Club, was there any kind of like community organizing that was being done in addition to or as a part of the firearms?
Yeah, I can speak to that. In Kansas City, in I think probably about 2006, I believe, maybe 2007, the Parks Department elected someone named Frances Semler to the Parks Department director. She was a known Minuteman organizer. And so the city rose up against her, and there was a lot of controversy over her being put into the Parks Department. When the controversy started happening, the Minutemen announced that they were going to be doing their national conference, as a show of support to her in Kansas City. And we used our contacts that we had made at these gun shows to find out information about where the conference was going to be held, who was organizing it, get lots and lots of background information. But we were then able to use to create what we called the Kansas City Rainbow Coalition at the time, that we founded with a bunch of other organizations in Kansas City. We were able to use that information to pressure the theater that they were doing their conference at into allowing us to talk to people out in front of the venue that they were doing their conference at, and not call the police on us, and not have us taken off for trespassing. So we were able to counter-recruit people that were going into the conference in their space because of the work we'd already been doing. We were also able to use our contacts as a kind of, not bargaining tool, but kind of like a bridge to get other groups to trust us, other liberal groups and church groups and things like that. We were able to use that information and say, like, hey, we know these things already about this organization that we all want to work against, and use that as a way to get them to understand that we'd been doing this work already, that we knew what we were talking about, and we were already organizing against it. And we were fairly successful, mostly due to, the contacts we'd made doing gun shows and reaching out into those communities.
So can you talk a little bit more about counter-recruitment and tabling at gun shows? A lot of people are not familiar with that kind of organizing, so if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
A lot of people on the left, which is kind of where we were coming from at the time especially, a lot of people on the left had basically written off these spaces. Gun shows, NASCAR rallies, rodeos, country music shows. These places were basically written off as some place that were like, that's that's right-wing culture, and we're just going to let them have that. But we see it differently. We see it as these are working-class spaces. These are working-class people. Most of our members come from these communities. These are people that are, our communities. We were bus drivers at the time, and we would see people that we bus drive with at gun shows. Like, going to these places, it wasn't like we were inserting ourselves into a place that we weren't supposed to be. It was places that we knew. So we go to those places and try and be counter voices to some of the hyper-nationalism that you see, some of the racism. But we also go to those places as community members and say, we don't believe these things should be happening in our community. We don't believe that this is what our community represents. And most of the time, the people that are bringing a lot of these hyper-nationalism, white nationalism, white supremacy into those spaces are people that are not even from our communities. The Minutemen were in Kansas. They were an Arizona border group that were in Kansas. They didn't have any right to be in our community.
Can you talk a little bit more about the Kansas Rainbow Coalition that you brought up earlier? If you could speak on it, who was a part of that, what was that like, how does that relate to the original Rainbow Coalition?
Yeah, I guess the first thing I want to say, though, about the efficacy of the Minutemen protest was that was the first and last National Minutemen Conference that the Minutemen Civil Defense Corps ever attempted. So there were no follow-up conferences. There was nothing that happened after that on their end. That was their first and last attempt to even try to hold a conference like that. As far as the question about the Kansas City Rainbow Coalition, it was pretty short-lived. It was more just specifically for that action. We definitely, one of the failures at that time was being unable to really take advantage of that in a more long-term way, especially to continue to push for workers' rights from all sorts of backgrounds, no matter what country they were born in. That would have been probably the biggest victory if we had pulled it off, but we weren't able to continue that momentum after the Minutemen Conference collapsed. People viewed it as a preliminary victory, and that was kind of the end of it. People, celebrated, and that was done. They didn't really move forward from that point. But it was modeled after the original Rainbow Coalition in the way that our group at that point, Kansas Mutual Aid and the John Brown Gun Club was associated with it, was mostly a white organization, and we were working alongside a lot of migrant, brown and black organizations, civil rights organizations, community organizations, church groups, community centers to kind of work to shut down this conference. And it emulated the idea that together, when our communities are organized at their base, even though they're different, even though we face unique situations in these communities, we can come together to affect change that does affect all of us, just like the original Rainbow Coalition that happened in Chicago, throughout the 60s and 70s, that people from different and diverse backgrounds could come together through the shared struggles that their communities faced, come together to organize together for common good and for a common cause. Because ultimately, when you boil it down to things, though race affects us differently, social class is determined obviously by race, is a big determining factor. But what really unites most of us is we struggle to survive. Working class folks, poor folks, we struggle. And there are people in power systematically who benefit from that struggle and take advantage of our struggles and profit from those struggles. And those are the same people. The same people who are charging rents and stealing from our paychecks are doing it from people across the board, and it does affect people differently. There's unique conditions, and we're not trying to downplay that. But when we start to see our conditions as more shared and similar than dissimilar, and that we have more in common with each other than we do with these people who are profiting at our expense, then we can actually start to work together to change all of our lives. The other big thing, and what's important, and why we chose the name John Brown Gun Club to begin with, is that we understand especially that the folks in power, the rich folks, the folks who benefit from us struggling to survive every day, they've really benefited and profited from people buying into this logic that they have more in common with folks because of their skin color than they do because of their social positioning overall. And I guess what I mean is they've convinced a lot of us, especially white folks, that we have more in common with rich white folks than we do with migrants who live around the corner, or with black folks that are struggling to survive in the same workplaces that we are, or with Muslims who are living down the street and paying rent to the same landlords. They've convinced us that we have more in common with these folks who are profiting from all of us struggling to survive. And so historically, we've tended to do the work and act on behalf of those rich, mostly white folks, and that's been a major success for them. But at the moments that we start to see through that, and and we start to understand that we have more in common with our coworkers, our neighbors, and our family members than we do with these folks who live in mansions or giant penthouses in New York City, or, you know, own entire neighborhoods across California or wherever they choose to live. We can see that there's actually a real chance of things changing in favor of people who are poor or struggling to survive.
What happened with John Brown Gun Club after these actions against the Minutemen?
John Brown Gun Club was an extension of, not extension, but a side project of the Kansas Mutual Aid. When Kansas Mutual Aid ended, and we kind of all went different ways, and members moved on, the project went with it, and it went to Denver from there.
The thing is, the project more or less got put on complete hiatus. When I moved to Denver, I tried with a couple other people to kind of create a similar project in the vein of John Brown Gun Club that we tentatively called Redneck Revolt at that moment. That's where that name came from. But really it was more of a blog, very short-lived blog that was active for a short period, kind of trying to come up with a different way of communicating the thoughts and feelings and ideas of being a poor white working class person and understanding an historical role of white working class people in being in formations like the Klan or reactionary situations in defending horrific institutions like slavery or colonization of this country, or the armed takeover and theft of native land. While understanding the historical legacy, also looking at what potential existed for there to be, like we were talking about earlier, this new Rainbow Coalition model of how do we start to talk to other white folks and start to really have open dialogues about what it means to be poor and working class and not wanting to continue to contribute to the conditions that are destroying entire communities because we just create this violence against other members of the working class and other poor folks, and we just victimize each other. We continue to attack or beat up people because of the color of their skin or the people they choose to love or their gender, you know, or what country they were born in, or, you know, just what name they call God, and stop contributing to that. And how do we start to understand our role in that, while also understanding that as poor and working people, we have also a stake in this fight. That, you know, I think we have this, what shouldn't be a controversial stance, honestly, but I think that has become a semi-controversial stance amongst some folks, in that we believe that white working class people have a stake in fighting white supremacy. That white supremacy as an institution also destroys, it condemns our communities, it condemns our families, it condemns all of us as working and poor people, white folks included, to the conditions that we live in. Because we continue to work as foot soldiers for mostly rich white people and uphold these conditions, while we're always chasing this little carrot on a stick that's dangled in front of us, that we're taught that we have all these advantages and privileges, and we can just grab that carrot and we can just take that power if we want it. But we're never probably going to end up eating or living or enjoying life the way that these rich people do. We just probably won't. There's really no chance of that happening. But we're deluded into thinking that. And so we attack other folks. We beat up other folks in the streets. We join police units and kill and cage and kidnap people from their communities. We join the military and do the same thing overseas that we're doing to our communities here, and patrol them and militarize them and kill women and children and entire families because they look different or speak differently than us or worship a different God than we do. So we were trying to figure out, how do we stop doing that and move forward and actually start to create the world we want to live in for our families and our kids, because we do have a stake in that struggle as well. But it was really a blog. It was just kind of a way of writing, expressing those thoughts and ideas, very short-lived. There were other projects that kind of tried to take some of those ideas to heart, and there were some limited attempts at gun show tabling, but really the work that happened in Kansas was never really created again on the scale that I think we wanted until this newest formation of Redneck Revolt and John Brown Gun Club was founded in 2016.
So, for our listeners who are not very familiar with this project, there may be some confusion because we've used the term Redneck Revolt and John Brown Gun Club, and our online presence has both names. So can somebody explain what the difference is? And also, can somebody touch on why we use the term redneck, since redneck has a lot of connotations of, like, conservatism and things like that?
So we use John Brown Gun Club and Redneck Revolt kind of interchangeably at this point. Originally, the idea was that they were going to represent kind of our two wings of our praxis. That the Redneck Revolt chapters were going to be doing mostly counter-recruitment and working in their community to work against white supremacy and to reach out to members of the community. Then the John Brown Gun Club chapters would be active in doing arms training leftists or other folks in the community, marginalized groups or at-risk groups, or just other people in the community that want to learn to work with firearms. They'd be doing training for community defense and self-defense. In practice now, that really isn't the case. It's pretty much those two sides have merged, and most chapters are doing both, and it really is just kind of what the local chapter has decided to go with. Redneck Revolt and John Brown Gun Club are pretty much used interchangeably at this point for us. As far as the term and why we use Redneck Revolt, we realize that it's got a complex history, but redneck was originally used to denote union organizers. It was synonymous with the armed insurrection against the state during the mine wars in West Virginia, and so we use it to kind of harken back to that history of insurrection against the state and against the bosses, and against the forces that are trying to keep all working people divided.
So what led up to the reviving of Redneck Revolt and John Brown Gun Club?
Well, so I think in about May or June of 2016, Dave and a few other people, David basically just emailed us all, maybe a dozen people that he knew around the country that he'd organized with in the past, or that had been doing organizing in working class communities and had loose ties with or had directly worked with before, and just decided to kind of revive Redneck Revolt, the blog that he mentioned before, make a Facebook page out of it, make a website for it, but also really base it in actual organizing and get this project going. And it happened, it grew quickly, but it grew pretty organically, and we didn't really know what it was going to look like. A lot of the people that were in that original message thread or email thread are still involved in the network today, and ended up founding branches in places they're at, Black Hills, Maine, here in Lawrence, Kansas. I guess from there we quickly started deciding what we wanted the project to look like, deciding how we were going to add new members, and I think that really what we found is that a lot of people were interested in this idea, and a lot of people felt like this type of idea, doing outreach with working class people, doing anti-racist outreach, pro-queer, pro-trans outreach, tabling at gun shows, and then also doing community defense work and firearms training and knowledge spreading. A lot of people were really interested in this idea, and it really took off from there. We started developing interview processes for adding new branches to our network. We started, laying all these organizational pieces of organizational groundwork, deciding if we were going to be a dues-paying organization, and really just formalizing all of that. And I guess I'm not exactly sure, but I think we grew from about 4 or 5 branches at that point, June or July of last year, into 30-some branches that we have today in July of 2017, and just consistently growing since then. That's how we got to where we are today. Other things came out of that, kind of like community survival projects that people are working at, responses to white nationalist demonstrations or other racist demonstrations that were happening in people's communities, and we've used our network as a support and tactic sharing kind of, way to bounce ideas off of each other and support each other, and yeah.
I think also to keep in mind that this was all happening in the rise up to the time coming up to the election And so we were all kind of, we had long discussions as this was kind of happening, where we would be all chatting or talking, through Messenger about what we were watching happen in our communities with Trump and the rise of kind of reactionary violence. So when Dave contacted us all and had brought up, let's get this blog going, and we had all been doing this work before, and some of us had continued doing that work. When David contacted us all about that, and just kind of, this was just going to be a blog and a Facebook page we were going to be administering. And then suddenly we were all kind of having the same discussions of we're watching this happen in our communities, and we know each other, and we have kind of the background to do something about it, the background to start organizing against this. And I think none of us really planned for this to become what it was. It just grew out of need. This, like has been said, this was supposed to be just basically a blog, and then without really any good discussion out of it, it just started being we should help each other come up with these ideas, and help each other, found these survival organizations within our communities, and help each other learn arms training between each other. And, we just started sharing resources, and then we started saying we know other people that would be interested in this. We know other people that would have these skills that we can share as well. And we know other communities that need this as well. So we just started growing, and it happened, like Connor said, very organically. It was very unexpected, but we saw it as much needed. We also felt a lot of us came out of the left. We also felt like the left was not really presenting kind of any viable solutions to the rise of white nationalism that we were seeing. We didn't see it there being any real counter voices coming out in a way that made sense to us from our community. Obviously there was lots of people that were, speaking out, but from folks like us, we weren't hearing voices that sounded like us coming out. So that's kind of, like Connor said, it grew very organically and quickly.
I think the another thing that we should remember was going on at the time was massive responses to police violence going on all around the country. Around that time when we had started talking, I think right after we started talking, the Dallas shooting of 2 police officers happened, and I think, personally, and I think probably with other people, we were concerned about the left going towards a pretty dangerous kind of underground militant attempts at resistance, and seeing the level of danger that puts the people engaging in that and also just in my opinion, the way that it's weakened social movements in the past and put people in prison and just been a completely unsafe kind of dead-end tactic in the U.S. in the past. I think we wanted to create an alternative to that and, spread safe firearms use, spread the knowledge of safe firearms use, spread above ground militant organizing. Not that has not been going on the whole time, just that I think in a lot of ways we've been at a crux in the past few years of after Occupy died out, how do we reform the left, or how do we reform anti-capitalist or anti-racist organizing, how do we respond to police violence in our communities, and a lot of good responses have been happening since 2014 and before that, but gaining a lot more notoriety since 2014, since the shooting of Mike Brown. But we just wanted to add to that and like Tyler said, bring responses from our communities that we felt like were lacking or less heard and less organized.
Dave, do you have any quick final thoughts?
I think that where we're at now with this project, Connor and Tyler said, I think pretty similar things, is beyond what we ever thought was going to happen when we reformed this project. And I think that, for being 1 year into this project, I feel pretty excited for the prospects for what we can do another year from now, between exponential growth and also just all the ground that has been gained in all the different localities that we are active in. I think pretty excited for looking at what year 2 of Redneck Revolt could look like.
And if somebody wanted to join an existing branch or start a new branch, how would they go about doing that?
Well, they should go to our website, redneckrevolt.org, and go to the Contact Us section. So we have a recruitment email. It's recruitment@redneckrevolt.org if you would like to start your own branch. And we have a communications email if you're interested in doing interviews or getting more information. That's communication@redneckrevolt.org.
Okay, so I wanted to thank you three for joining us, and I hope our viewers found that as interesting as I did, and I hope to see you all soon.
Within our network membership, we have a number of talented musicians. This month we feature S. Preston Duncan's song, Whiskey Gingers. The song can be found on Bandcamp. Enjoy!
I got a weakness for younger girls with big ass and red hair. It don't ever end well, but I tell myself I don't care. I let them take me by the hand when there's a bottle of bourbon there. They all gas cans soft enough to make you wish life could be that fair. But turn your alcohol to sugar and your sugar into pine. Set your night on fire while they're running through your veins. Leave you crying outside like you're too drunk to feel the rain. Oh, it's plain to see this whiskey ginger's gonna be the end of me. Ain't they always sweet enough that you don't feel the burn? In the morning I'm feeling rough, don't guess I'll ever learn. They're always making rounds, and I don't wait my turn. The way they leave me hurting, I guess it's something that I heard. But turn your alcohol to sugar and your sugar into pain. Set your night on fire while they're running through your veins. Leave you crying outside like you're too drunk to feel the rain. Oh, it's plain to see this whiskey ginger's gonna be the end of me. It don't seem to matter how many I had. I always want another, though I feel them driving me mad. And darling, I can see you're a mistake I've made before. It all starts with a smile, and it ends with me on the floor. And if I had a lick of sense, I'd be headed towards that door. But the cause of my crying and the cure are both to have one more. You turn my alcohol to sugar and my sugar into pain. You set my night on fire while you're running through my veins. You leave me crying outside and I'll be too drunk to feel the rain. Oh, it's plain to see your whiskey ginger's gonna be the end of me. Oh, it's plain to see your whiskey ginger's gonna be the end of me. the end of May.
Hello, I'm Cameron with Phoenix John Brown Gun Club.
And this is Sophia, also with Phoenix John Brown Gun Club.
Two of us have been involved in the network since the start of this particular iteration of it. What we want to talk about today is a little bit about the things that we've accomplished as a network nationwide.
Yeah, so starting off, Phoenix was the first branch started in this iteration. We started off strong with the January 20th marches. We were there to do security for people protesting the inauguration of Donald Trump. And immediately the next day was the Women's March. And so that was a very busy weekend, but that was a really interesting experience in that we were really well received by a crowd of people who are mostly liberal. It was honestly surprising to see how well we were received. At the J20 protests in particular, we did have a slight fascist presence. They were completely outnumbered and kept them completely separate from the rest of the protesters, and I think they really appreciated that. So it was really cool to make those inroads with a crowd we normally wouldn't mesh with, you know?
At that point, too, by the time J20 hit, we had expanded quite a bit. But that was probably the first event that we actually got national attention from media.
Yeah.
There was images of us carrying arms. Got really sensationalized at that point. Brought us a lot of attention.
Yeah. And speaking of bringing us a lot of attention, we also obviously got a lot of attention at the MAGA March. It went off really well besides Stephen Lemons. That's a whole nother ball of wax with him. But yeah, the rest of the event went really well. Just a couple weeks ago, we were kind of aware of another event that was organized by the same kind of group of people. We were prepared for a large response. We were prepared for militias on their side, and they were kind of pathetic, actually. But we kept our discipline, remained serious. It's not something we take lightly. And I think overall it was a really good learning experience for a lot of us, and it was really positive, and we did display a lot of revolutionary discipline. One other thing we do, which is kind of the less public kind of aspect of it, but equally important, if not more so important, is tabling at gun shows. It's kind of a different ball of wax when you're going to a gun show where there's a lot of very right-wing people who are fascist and aren't necessarily hiding it, people who hold very far right-wing views and who probably are transphobic. And I have this in mind that it was going to be really, people were going to be sneering at me, or I was going to get clocked, which means people can tell that I'm trans. Yeah, I was definitely a little bit concerned, but what I did beforehand is I went with a couple of comrades from our branch to a gun show and just visited a gun show before we tabled, and it actually wasn't that bad. Most of these people, they're just vendors, they're capitalists. They, if you want to buy a gun or anything from them, they don't give a shit, I even bought stuff and I had to show my ID. My ID has my dead name, didn't bat an eye, you know what I mean? Obviously there was one crew of people with red suspenders we saw, but it was way better than I thought. And when we actually tabled, we again practiced very strict discipline, and we make sure we always have a buddy. I never went to the bathroom alone. We take it serious, and I remember a lot of people felt their first, when they went, they felt it actually was really laid back, that first one.
Yeah, we got a lot of really good interactions with people. They were coming up, checking out our literature. It was the first one we went to was before locally they really knew who we were, which I think gave us a lot of leeway into being able to open up this dialogue with the folks that were attending and stuff. But we had some really good conversations. A lot more people than we expected were already kind of towing the line of similar politics. Yeah. We made a lot of good inroads and built some decent relationships with a lot of local people who have similar ideas of where to go from here. I mean, gun shows aren't necessarily the only place that we've inserted ourselves as far as typically white-run spaces go in the efforts of counter-recruitment. We've had chapters nationwide go to NASCAR events, rodeos, country shows, various other things that are typically overrun with white working class folks that sometimes those racist sentiments tend to seep into Another thing that we've done nationwide that's been very successful as far as networking goes and things like that is being able to offer trainings, and we do that both internally and externally with groups who reach out to us and are wanting to become more familiarized with firearms. As far as safety goes and basic training, we have trainers in various chapters across the country, and the chapters that don't have trainers are, for the most part, actively trying to get people trained to be able to pass that knowledge on. But here locally, we've been able to network with a few awesome groups of folks, and from various different marginalized communities and things like that, to where we can go in and teach some of their members how to train people too, so that they can pass on that information as well, so that we're not maintaining this role of gatekeeping the knowledge of firearms trainings, because that's not what we're about. We want to help spread that wealth of knowledge so that it can kind of become a self-replicating thing. We want to train people so that they can train people, so that the access and knowledge of using firearms safely and responsibly can be available to everybody, because we believe that it's a fundamental right of everyone to be able to protect themselves, to be able to defend themselves.
A lot of times the trainings that we do are people within our communities as well, and it's about having that, people who might be marginalized because of their skin color or their sexuality or gender identity, making sure we have solidarity with them because we're all part of the same class. I think the practice of solidarity, not charity, really plays a huge role in how we do the gun trainings, and it's really a really positive thing.
And even beyond just training people with these firearms and things like that, some of the chapters are offering various different other trainings as far as harm reduction, growing food, and things like that. So there's a diverse wealth of knowledge within our network that we try to help spread around.
And kind of in that same line of solidarity, we also try to have established community survival programs. Cameron touched on some of those a little bit. One of the biggest ones, obviously, is the vegetable garden in Silver Valley that got a little bit of media attention. That's one of the best examples of a food program I've seen in a while. We have also some chapters that work very closely with Food Not Bombs. So sometimes the things that we're involved with as far as community survival programs are not necessarily a Redneck Revolt or a John Brown Gun Club thing. You know what I mean? We plug in with existing projects or projects that some of our members are a part of both even, and help have solidarity through that way. We also do harm reduction. Sometimes, again, some chapters have their own, a harm reduction program, a needle exchange established through their branch. But other chapters, again, plug in with existing projects. What's the name of the project out here?
Here in Phoenix, there's an awesome project called Snoring Prevention Works, which has made quite the effort to make sure that people are able to get the resources they need to be safe with the way they're going about things. We've had members help put together these kits and things like that for that group, and made an effort to provide aid. There's a lot of good harm reduction programs all over the country, though. I do recommend looking into what you've got locally. It's worth plugging into.
Thanks, y'all. We'll get back to you in just a minute. Now, over the last year, we've really started to make a name for ourselves, and everybody seems to have an opinion.
The armed forces of the Redneck Revolt.
Let's talk about the John Brown Gun Club.
I like to say the left wing get feisty.
This is masquerading as a gun club, but again, they still believe in the same stuff as Antifa, such as domestic terrorism, such as intimidation.
They're all geared up, they got their fucking plate carriers on, drop leg holsters. I mean, these are the same people that have been bitching about guns and how we need to get rid of them.
But it's the guns that have made them famous.
They're crazy, number one. They walk around the streets with guns, pretending like they're some sort of, universal soldier and shit.
Redneck Revolt likes to say the guns aren't central to their mission, but their aggressive posturing risks overshadowing everything else they stand for, and alienating the very neighbors they hope to appeal to.
You're gonna shoot at me? I'm not gonna shoot you. You're gonna want me to what?
And they're pretending that they're trying to defend minorities.
Man, you give a dark impression of what's happening in the country right now.
Yeah, I don't know, I think it's pretty dark.
We've had several media interactions, interviews, things like that. With media in general, it's kind of it's a double-edged sword. If you choose to not interact with the media at all, they control the narrative.
we have to put trust in that, like, working folks, the people we interact with are really intelligent, and they're going to see through the nonsense, and we have to, like, not be afraid of the media because we think that they'll just buy into it because it's not true. Some people will buy into it no matter what you do, but those people are probably not going to want to listen to what you have to say anyway.
Those media coverage that we've gotten to has really helped, I think, get a lot of the work that we're doing out there as far as actions that we have either put on ourselves or lended our help towards. When the Traditionalist Workers Party had kind of planned this huge event in Pikeville, and
you should explain what that party is to people who don't know.
The Traditionalist Workers Party is a white nationalist group who primarily has been recruiting in the Appalachian region. I mean, they're not too different from any white nationalist group. They're kind of preying on the white working class as far as trying to provide this narrative that they believe that they're giving a way out to white workers and things like that, so that they can help foster this community of white workers and help bring people out of poverty and things like that.
But they do it by scapegoating people of color, immigrants, queer folks, all the stuff.
And they planned a rally in Pikeville to kind of perpetuate that picture that they've tried to paint of providing a way out for white working class folks. And a number of other groups and members of the local community there came out to show opposition. I feel like it was very successful. Another event in the Appalachian region too was in Asheboro, North Carolina. The Klan had planned some rally. We had members too. I don't know if anyone saw the very first Vice piece that came out. A little segment kind of showed a little bit about that, where they interviewed some members of the Silver Valley chapter. Other things that we've shown up to too, there was a few members from different chapters showed up down in Hot Springs, Arkansas. There was a Confederate flag rally that happened there. There was some great outreach done at that point. Conversations started with members of the community there.
Yeah, so kind of like building off of that too, like coalition and community building is like a huge part of our practice too, and I think that's kind of like a common misconception. I'm sure, you know, it's been said in earlier segments, but I think it needs to be stressed as much as possible that, like, counter recruitment in the white working class and in right-wing spaces is an important part of this project, but so is building coalition community with marginalized folks and people we want relationships with.
I don't think that our presence at a lot of the actions that we've had would have been possible without the coalitions that we've been building within the communities around us, with various different groups.
Yeah, so I mean, we've had strong ties with Brothers Against Racist Cops for quite a while, and they were one of the groups we helped to raise funds to arm. You know, we have relationships with some of the Brown Beret chapters, some AFA chapters. We've talked to people from the Young Patriots, which is getting restarted.
Along with the Rainbow Coalition as a whole, which we have had the honor of being invited to participate in with this new iteration of the Rainbow Coalition, which is huge for us because anyone who knows a lot about our history, a lot of the motivations that started us was groups like that in the 60s and 70s who had kind of broken down those racial barriers to create working class movements and things. The Rainbow Coalition originally started in Chicago, and it was a lot of different groups, but primarily the Young Patriots, the Young Lords, and the Black Panthers. And we've been able to build some inroads with members of those organizations who are still around today, and
new organizations too.
And new organizations as well who are taking part in these nationwide coalitions. So that's been exciting and an honor for us to be asked to participate in the new formation of the Rainbow Coalition. We've given numerous presentations on them and their influence on us through one of the workshops that we do nationwide called Combating Fascism.
When it comes to like other like activists who aren't necessarily radical, we definitely kind of have this approach of like, if they ask us for help, we'll be there in whatever capacity they want us to be. Obviously, like, there's some exceptions, but one of like the biggest example of that is, like I said earlier, like the Women's March, which was obviously not 100% without its problems. We've made a show that we can be a part of our communities despite these differences. Another example is standing with marginalized folks such as at the anti-Sharia marches. We stood with counter-protesters. As far as like a recent event goes, that has been something that's been like really, really positive. We've been able to build community with people who are directly being attacked by fascists. And again, it's like living that solidarity, not charity model, to where like we are there in a capacity they want us to be there. We're just there to stand with them and not for them.
That was a nationwide thing that happened. A lot of groups, I believe it was ACT was the main one kind of perpetuating those marches nationwide. And so a lot of our chapters stepped up to help defend the community as far as that goes. I think a lot of successful inroads were made there nationwide. And even some really good conversations were had with, the opposition in that regard, as far as, why they were doing that and why it was wrong. There was some good coverage of our Northern Lower Michigan chapter, some conversations that were had between our members out there and some of the people who had shown up for the anti-Sharia march and were able to change some minds and stuff. And there's an awesome photo going around of one of our members giving one of their members a hug and stuff after a fairly heated conversation.
They were both veterans too, weren't they?
Yeah, and so I think that we don't always necessarily believe in the capacity for change as far as that side, but some of the conversations that we've been able to have, I think that some of the conversations had during the anti-Sharia stuff show that there is hope for kind of like counteracting that narrative that's been shaped by the right. And
whether you agree with them or not, people who are in like Oath Keepers or 3%ers, they think that their intentions are good, they're doing the right thing, and for a lot of people, like, they're just looking for a community to belong with, right? If we talk to them and tell them, like, maybe these things are getting in the wrong direction, or maybe, like, further right-wing forces are trying to push y'all further to the right and support some very nasty fascist actions, platforms, etc., maybe you can get through to some people and say, like, you have way more in common with the folks of color in your neighborhood, the folks of color who are your coworkers, than you do with your boss, or with Milo Yiannopoulos, or Donald Trump, or Richard Spencer. Like, these people have nothing in common with you. You know what I mean? All these people who share the same class struggle as you are going to have a lot more identity with you in the long run. And they're going to have your interests at heart. And I think it's important to see these problems as systematic and not as some kind of moral failing. And I think, by and large, that's why I like both the counter-recruitment and the community building aspect, because it encompasses it all, and it's truly like a class-based praxis that doesn't ignore issues that people of color face, or disabled people, or people face, because of capitalism. Another example of building community that's happened really recently, since it is Pride Month, it's a lot of our chapters have been going out to different Pride marches, just basically doing security and standing between the right and the people who are trying to just enjoy their lives, being out of the closet and be happy. When in Phoenix, we have our Pride Month a few months early, or our Pride March, I should say, a few months early, because it's hot in June. We were out there standing between the marchers and the Westboro Baptist Church, who came out to protest. But Phoenix was really interesting too, because we had a local group, Queer Trans Pueblo, who actually protested the march itself because of the corporate influence and the lack of awareness about what Pride was originally for, right? Like, the first Pride was literally a riot against police brutality. They were trying to point these things out, and the organizers put them in between the Phoenix PD and the Sheriff's Department. They still stopped the march, and we're faced by a lot of racism within the gay community. So we were there to stand between the Westboro Baptist Church, and then that happened, and we've made some connections with that group as well.
As every year it happens with the counter-protesters of Pride and things like that, I think that the particular climate of this year has brought a lot more of that hate towards the queer trans community out from the shadows. some of our chapters, had made inroads with the organizers of prides in local areas and were able to come out as kind of a buffer between like those hate groups and things like that. Mm-hmm. And then our network having, the amount of queer and trans members that we do, there's a lot of folks who showed up, to participate in Pride as well. And, some great connections we've made nationwide with the various different Pride organizers as well, as far as, getting back into the coalition and community building. So I think that that's been a really awesome opportunity for us as well.
Absolutely.
This podcast is going to be dropped on our year anniversary, which will be July 7th. Like I said at the beginning of this, Sophie and I have been a part of this since this iteration started, and I think that when this network came back into existence, at July 7th, 2016, we had, I believe, 8 members and 3 chapters. Yeah. And now we have over 30 chapters, hundreds of members nationwide, and I think that being able to be a part of that and being able to watch that growth over this year, it's not. I don't think there's any way that I could have expected it to have taken off the way that it did.
No, I had no idea.
Obviously, there was the hopes that we could help contribute to fixing some of the issues that we have here in the U.S.
Yeah,
and things like that. But the response that we've gotten and the amount of people who wanted to plug in and have gone through the effort of being vetted and starting chapters, and I think has shown us that this work is meaningful. And it's been a real pleasure to be a part of it.
Absolutely. I think the reason why it grew the way that it did is because this was a missing piece of the puzzle as far as a broader left strategy. There's a reason why this group appeals to people from all different sects of the left, people who are libertarian, people who are really new to political organizing in general. The reason why this appeal has such a broad appeal is that it addresses this kind of resistance to change that's kind of grown in America due to very strict and powerful propaganda campaigns against any kind of radical change. Anything that addresses the core or the root of these systematic issues is always attacked. And also our education system does not teach people about any of these political ideas that are attracted to our group, so we are able to take away the stigmatizing language a little bit and just get to the bread and butter of what we're talking about in a way that appeals to lots of sects of the left and lots of different libertarian type of people, and put it in a plain way and talk to people on a very real basis about things that affect them. No matter who you are, what you are, we all need a place to live, food on our table, something to make life a little bit easier, a few comforts, and just a warm pillow at night, and a way to provide for our families. Neoliberalism, this far right-wing capitalist ideology we've seen rise up is not helping. Both the Republicans and the Democrats have represented that. And then Donald Trump came, and he represented something different, at least rhetorically, right? I don't think he really does represent anything different, but he is a sign of the times. I think now is the time to have this group to kind of just talk to people in a very real way and talk about things that affect them, and maybe point out that what Donald Trump said he was going to do is not happening. Anything even remotely positive, right? It's not happening. There's a lot of really fucked up scapegoating that's going on, and there's a reason why he's getting backing from a lot of different white nationalist groups. And I don't think he is a white nationalist, but I do think he is playing up to that crowd a little bit. That edging further to the right is dangerous, and it needs to be stopped. And it needs to be stopped, but we also need to address not just Donald Trump, but the root cause of all these issues, and I think that's what we're seeking to do in a material way, and I think that's really important.
Yeah. In doing that, we've also sought to kind of break down these ideological barriers that have come into existence. I think another one of the appeals that we've had with folks is the fact that we've made a real effort to be a Big Tent organization. We don't believe in the division. That we believe in class unity, and that means breaking down those barriers, like on a lot of different lines. We have members who are anarchists, we have members who are communists, we have members who are Republicans, we have members who are libertarians. Like, right. I think we kind of spread out all over the spectrum, and I think that a lot of ways it would seem that those ideological differences would create too much of an issue with being able to organize with each other, but we've seen a lot of success as far as building these relationships with each other. Yep. Our network has grown immensely in size. It's still very close-knit. There's still a lot of very real conversations and a lot of very real support going on between the members of our network, emotional and material ways. Like, sometimes we have to set our ideologies aside and step out of our echo chambers and start to make real connections with the people who are in our immediate community, the people around us. And that's what our goal has been over this past year, and that's what our goal will continue to be.
Absolutely.
I think with that, we're going to pass the segment off. Some of our other comments, who are going to get into a little bit about what we hope to accomplish in the future.
Take care.
Hey, this is Jamil. This last segment is going to be diving into the future of Redneck Revolt, some of the goals that we've set for ourselves, the ways in which we can continue to achieve success looking forward in the next 2, 3, 4 years. I think as we look ahead to the future of the network, there is a fair amount of work we'd like to be doing more of, as well as potentially diversifying the type of work that's done under the Redneck Revolt banner. I think we're witnessing a constant evolution of the network, and those of us who are involved with the process of onboarding new branches into the network sort of get to see like a bit of a regeneration happen as new branches sprout up and begin tackling the work in their communities and seeking the guidance of some of the other older, more seasoned branches that have existed in the network. Big picture, we need to be better, we need to be stronger, we need to be a more unified movement, especially as it pertains to our stated mission of liberating a multiracial working class. We really need to keep up the pressure in directly challenging the forces which keep us struggling and facing really uncertain futures. We need to be confronting the brutality of the police. We need to be confronting a lot of the tyranny that's coming from the state right now as it pertains to everyday folks and as well as how it pertains to activists in this country right now. And we need to be combating and counter-recruiting a lot of the reactionary elements and foot soldiers of white supremacy. Under the current administration, we're witnessing the rise of a really very dogmatic nationalism, which is nothing new, but I think we're seeing a strain of it that is a little bit more vitriolic and willing to act out than in more recent presidential administrations. And this is definitely a direct threat to our liberation. And frankly, it's a threat to our very movement. But anyway, getting back, I think ultimately there's 4 pieces that are central to the future of Redneck Revolt. And the first one, I went over a little bit, but it's quite simply expansion. And when I say expansion, I'm referring to the adding and vetting of more branches as requests sort of come into us and as those requests begin to ramp up, as we become more known across the country. And I think getting the word out is essential for that. That's something that's constantly happening on a ground level. I think a lot of the media pieces can be a bit dicey, but they can potentially achieve similar effects. And just letting folks know that they can start their own branches in their town, city, greater community, regardless of whether it's rural area, grouping of rural areas, or if it's the opposite of that is something like a dense city in Southern California. So as it stands now, July 2017, we're looking at roughly 35 branches that are active throughout the country, and that's going back 12 months. We want to be able to cover more areas throughout the country and continue to represent different types of areas, whether they be metropolitan or rural. We also want to be splitting the difference between the two different types of branches. So for those who don't know, everything is under the Redneck Revolt banner. However, folks who are starting a new branch can opt to take on the name of the John Brown Gun Club. For example, I'm in the Phoenix John Brown Gun Club versus just simply a Redneck Revolt branch. The difference between the two is that John Brown gun clubs are responsible for cultivating literally a gun club or armed defense organization and really using the firearm praxis as first foot forward type deal. I think that Redneck Revolt branches obviously still can engage with the firearm praxis, but it's less about putting it forward. And I think depending on the folks in your branch, and depending on the firearm laws in your state, as well as just the general culture of the community you're representing, it might make some more sense to go with one over the other. That's really for the branch to decide. But it'd be nice to get a little more of an even split between the two right now. Redneck Revolt branches do outnumber John Brown Gun Club, which is, again, not a bad thing. I think another thing is that branches really should continue to be learning from one another and joining forces in actions when we do have branches that can sort of drive out and connect physically with others. And also replicating successes from branch to branch is like really a must for the health of the network. Being able to share information and wisdom, whether that's successes or failures, like having a network that is interconnected is really, really essential. The last thing we want is for folks to be operating under the guise of Redneck Revolt and not know what the branch next door is up to. The second big goal is building coalitions on a branch level with like-minded activist groups that are on the ground. So approaching groups who are doing really important work in our communities and asking them what we can do as Redneck Revolt to support them. That might be helping to raise funds. That might be being directly involved in the material work itself. We want to establish, build, and maintain coalitions with those organizers where it works out for both of us. We definitely want to be establishing, building, and maintaining community defense units, whether they're armed or unarmed. And I think the unarmed part really takes shape in regards to survival programs, harm reduction initiatives, and service programs that are sort of designed to help those in need of like really basic human needs and services. I think it's central for us to be as involved with those types of activist groups as possible. And again, we do have the capability to help fundraise for groups who are more in line with, say, the firearm praxis that we tout. So helping to fundraise for community defense groups who might be a little more specialized than us or representing a very specific community versus being more big tent. The third goal is to continue to up our tactical fitness. When I say tactical fitness, I'm referring to a few different things, namely firearm expertise, being able to handle a firearm adeptly, but also being able to talk about it adeptly and understand it on that level, so that when we do go to gun shows, we are authoritative in terms of our breadth of understanding, just sort of holding our own in those types of environments. Tactical fitness also has to do with handling and ability, so not just accuracy in terms of shot, but also being able to maneuver in different situations, in different positions. I think safety is massive, and demonstrating that the responsibility and the discipline of what it means to be a community defense organization that is handling lethal weapons, understanding the weight of that, and demonstrating that we respect the weight of it, and that we're not here to abuse that. And then I think the last thing is sort of firming up like response teams and how quick they can be to respond to situations. So that's sort of more on the logistical end of things. So lastly, the fourth and probably the most difficult goal is to become a more utilized resource in our communities. You know, as a community defense force, and as folks who have a stake in the communities, like I think there's a lot of different ways we can be engaging with our respective communities. One is obviously meeting them and meeting them where they're at. I think allowing them to speak so that we may listen and sort of taking a step back and understanding their attitudes is really central to how we approach counter-recruitment, but also just skepticism of a bunch of folks being in their town and touting firearms and really organizing around working class and multiracial liberation. I think, having those folks identify their problems and their struggles so that we can gauge the community's pressure points is super important. Other facets like understanding what their unmet needs are, understanding what their hopes are, their joys, their victories, and essentially their relationships to one another is going to help us to understand how we can fit into that. And I think that retrieving that information and making that a priority allows us to build analysis about our individual communities and share it back internally with the network, but also like externally as well. And it's just really goes back to that sentiment of having a stake in your community, but also having a stake in fighting things like reactionary violence and white supremacy. Having the community aware of us and sort of trusting us is really the biggest challenge we face. And that's going to take a really long time to get going. But we need to be putting in that work right now. So we know that our answers come from a community level, right? So that's where every person should be allowed to participate in making decisions that affect all of our lives. We believe that community power and community rights is the way over the rights of any government body. And I think those 4 ways really sum up the future of Redneck Revolt, and I think if we can execute on all those levels to a decent degree, it's going to cement our continued success. And yeah, I think that the future of Redneck Revolt is a bright one. Yeah, thanks.
Alright, thank you for tuning in to the debut episode of the Redneck Revolt. Be sure to check out the latest on Facebook, and again, check out their website at redneckrevolt.org. Find out if a local Redneck Revolt or John Brown Gun Club branch exists in your town, and if not, hit us up and start one yourself.
If you'd like to support the network, consider donating